One, two. One, two. Check, check.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome to episode number, I think it's number 11 of Mental Health Chat. I am your host, Mental Health Matt, as I am sure you're aware if you're here on the channel already. I am joined today by Steve Fredlund. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for being with us. Cool. Well, let's start by diving into your bio a little bit because you have one of the longer bios that from people that we've had on the show. I don't know whether to introduce you as a small business coach, philanthropist, poker guy. Like what kind of what's your description these days? Ah, okay.
Yeah, primarily my real job is as a business coach. I own something called the Small Business Community, which is really about connecting coaches and experts from around the world to help like the micro businesses, the small businesses that are
Mm-hmm.
struggling, especially during COVID. So I do a lot of that. Then I do the Rec Poker podcast and membership thing that we have going on there. I do a fair amount of public speaking. I run a nonprofit doing work in Rwanda. So just a lot of things to try to keep me out of trouble, I guess.
Cool. All right. Well, that's yeah. There's a lot of great stuff going on there. Um, but let's talk a little bit about your career on the business side because you've mentioned in the past to me that you kind of were in the corporate area. Now you've moved more into the sort of coaching side of things, and that your experience with anxiety kind of played a role in that. So let's start by talking about where you were and where you are now, and what that transformation was.
Yeah, so I spent about 30 years in the corporate world. So
Mm-hmm.
I was a math major. I'm an actuary by trade, which is basically just an accountant but without the personality. Uh, and so they always say the outgoing actuaries are the one that looks at somebody else's shoes in the elevator. So,
Right.
and it's true, like that is the actuarial world. But I spent about 30 years doing actuarial stuff, which was basically math and finance,
Mm-hmm.
and then that moved into investments. So I did a fair amount of capital markets hedging, where I would start different groups and do some of that. And then I guess at the tail end of my career, I moved into human resources, which is kind of an odd thing if you're an analytical person in the corporate world. It's not a very common transition to go into HR, but they wanted to start something called workforce analytics,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically using data, using numbers to try to make decisions about personnel and human resources related things. I'm like, that sounds super sweet, because I love starting new things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I was doing capital markets hedging. They said, well, let's have you come over here and do that. So I did that, went into HR, and I spent the last, it was probably 2, 3 years or so of my corporate career in HR. And that was where it sort of started. Some of the anxiety stuff started there because I
Mm-hmm.
really didn't have it. I was always, I was always shy. I always lacked confidence my whole
Mm-hmm.
life, which surprises some people, but it's just true. But it was never really anxiety.
Right.
But when I moved into HR, it started. Some of that started to like, what is this? What is actually going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we can chat about that. But then um, I got moved into into a global role doing HR workforce analytics, and as such, they moved us into a shared office space,
Right.
which if you're not familiar with this idea, it's instead of having your own office, your own cube, you're just sort of all in one room,
Mm-hmm.
and there's really no walls, nothing at all. You're just kind of all in there at once. And we can talk about the role that that played, but that's really where the anxiety kicked in. And it was devastating. And I was like, what is going on? And I've
Mm-hmm.
been in the corporate world for 30 years and I don't know what's happening. And so that was my corporate experience. And that ultimately played a huge role in me leaving. I ended up leaving the company, went out on my own, which is something I'd kind of wanted to do for a while, but
Yeah.
this really forced me there.
Wow.
So
That's
uh,
a
just a couple
that
years ago.
yeah. Wow. That's a really interesting sort of evolution there because it sounds like the role that you were playing and the development of the anxiety kind of connected together in the sense that as your role started to change, as the day to day maybe changed, your experience of it changed as well. Is that pretty much what happened?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think, I've done a fair amount of therapy and things since trying to figure this thing out, especially at the time. But, for most of my career, obviously I was a manager and I had bosses and all that sort of stuff, but it was like me and my spreadsheet and my tools, right? Like it was
Mm-hmm.
like me doing my thing,
Yeah.
um, and then, moving into HR, where it's much more relational. There's much more, activity, people popping in and out and saying hi, and it's beautiful, right? It's wonderfully relational. But I think that experience started me down this road of what is going on, and we can talk about what that is. And then when it got into the full blown shared office space, that's when all hell broke loose in
Mm-hmm.
my brain. But yeah, so it was direct. I mean, unless there was something else going on that just so happened to kind of parallel that, it was never an issue until I moved into that sort of environment, and then it really ratcheted up when I moved into that other environment.
Wow. Okay. So what was the first time when you recognized that something was different or something was wrong, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say it was when I moved into HR. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right, so I had the office and everything was good, right? I had my own space and I could
Mm-hmm.
kind of control who was in and out.
Yeah.
And then when I moved into HR, I had an opportunity to have an office, but I said, no, I don't want an office because I wanted to be kind of with the team and kind of out in the middle of hubbub and
Mm-hmm.
really kind of catch what's going on there. Maybe that was a mistake or whatever, but that's kind of what I wanted. And within a week or so, I started feeling a little bit anxious, but I just sort of chalked it up to this is different.
Yeah.
Um, because now, somebody would come in at, I'd be in there usually right away. I'd be in there at 6:30 or whatever. Somebody come in at 7 and they would start telling the story about their dog or whatever it is. And, as an actuary, I'm like, I don't care, but I care about people. So I care about the story, right?
Yeah.
And then somebody else would come in and I'd hear the story again because now they would tell that person the story about their dog. Somebody else would come in, they tell the story again. And it was like, so it's just sort of that, like, I was thinking, is this just because I'm frustrated by inefficiency? I'm frustrated
Mm.
by, come on, we have work to do here. And it wasn't somebody on my team. It was just somebody on another. And so I don't know what was bugging me. It was just like, this is different. It's sort of it was annoying to me. It was annoying
Right.
to
I
me.
see. Mm-hmm.
And then people kind of pop in, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, cool, and I'm a relational guy. Like, this is fun. But then I'd be like, okay, crap, where was I?
Yeah.
Now I got to restart because I'm like 30 yards deep into my spreadsheet, right? Now I
Mm-hmm.
got to pull myself up to talk about, what we should do for lunch. And then I got to go back in. And so it was just sort of like, it was different. So I was just chalking it all up to this is just kind of different
Mm-hmm.
here. In HR, they'd have the table out with the crayons and people would be coloring just to kind of as sort of as an exercise or, sort of a
Mm-hmm.
soothing thing, or like, this is just kind of fun or whatever. And that was new to me. Like you don't go to actuarial, conventions and color or have little squeezy toys. So
Yeah.
everything was just different
Mm-hmm.
in going to HR. And so that's just kind of where I chalked it up, but I knew something was happening. And I just thought, okay, this just isn't a good fit. I didn't really think that in a sense, sort of my brain was breaking.
Right. Do you think it started as just a feeling of being outside your comfort zone, and then it sort of evolved a bit more beyond that?
That's a great way to put it. Yes, that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I would say. Like, this is uncomfortable, but I'd like to think I'm humble enough to think, well, it's just different. It's not good or
Mm-hmm.
bad. It's just different, and it's not comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's what I chalked it up to.
Right. And then I suppose over time, there's an evolution where we get to start to understand where these feelings come from a bit better. We get to familiarize ourselves with maybe the physical symptoms that we feel and things like that. Was there was there a certain period of time where after it went on for so long, you started to think, wow, this isn't just like I'm struggling to adjust. Like, this is a real problem that I'm dealing with?
Well, yeah, yes and no. So it was probably there for a couple of years. I was in that role before I got
Mm-hmm.
moved into a global role, and I think I'd figured out a way to kind of cope with it and to deal with it. So getting in earlier, leaving earlier, that was one tactic.
Okay.
Making sure I had meetings other places. I would actually take my laptop and go work for a couple hours in another building.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to kind of, I figured out ways around it so I didn't feel so trapped is really kind of what it came down to. Is I was out of control and I was trapped. I really didn't have control of my environment. And so I think I just sort of accepted it as the new normal. I assumed it was my fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is something I'm doing wrong, or I'm not able to adjust. I'm not flexible. I'm too rigid in my thinking. I'm too nerdy, all of these things that I sort of just kind of lumped on there and said, this is my fault. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is something's wrong with me that I can't adjust to this. So let's make some accommodations. Let me just start. I'll take a longer lunch and bring my laptop and just work in the cafeteria, just so I'm not surrounded by all the activity and I can focus. And that was kind of the excuse I use, is I just need to focus.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I learned to just sort of dampen it and kind of push it down enough for it to be manageable. And it
Mm-hmm.
was. I wouldn't say I loved the job, but it was manageable. And we were doing some great things, and we had some good results there. But I was able to do that until this other change happened.
Right, I see. So it sort of it sounds like the process of managing it was more just a question of having a set of techniques or approaches that you used kind of within the workplace, but maybe not so much in more of a holistic sense, more just of like putting a band-aid on it while you're actually at work. Is that pretty much how it was?
100%. Yeah.
Right.
See, you should just tell my story because you tell it so much more succinctly than I do. But no, that's exactly right. It was putting the band-aids on those things, because at that point, I felt like anything that I was feeling was my own fault.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
there was some shortcoming in me that I couldn't adjust. And so I wasn't working on myself. I wasn't trying to dig into what's causing this,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to figure that out. I was just going, okay, I don't like this because it's uncomfortable and it's different. And, I talk to my actuary buddies and we just laugh about how HR is so different and ha
Mm-hmm.
ha, but all the while, yeah, just kind of putting up these I guess these processes so that I could just sort of get through the day. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And did it start bleeding over into life outside work at a certain point?
I would say just a little bit,
Okay.
conversations that I'd have with my wife and my family,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit, but I don't feel like it really impacted who I was outside. I think I was just able to say, let's just compress this here. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
I'm either naturally pretty good at this or pretty bad at this, about segmenting my life. Sort of,
Right.
my wife and I joke about, there's work mode, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm in work mode, and
Right.
working from home makes that hard because I'm in work mode, but I'm home. But
Mm-hmm.
when I go to the office, work mode. And so I think I try to just, whatever happened there sort of stayed there,
Mm-hmm.
unless it was really like, needed to be discussed outside of there. But so normally I kept it there, but yeah, I think a little bit of that started creeping out, and starting to impact, my life outside of there.
Mm-hmm. And at what point did you make the decision that this was an environment where you kind of needed a change? You needed to sort of like make that shift outside of the corporate world.
Yeah, well, and at this point, it was still, it was manageable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was like I didn't make the decision there. I was thinking maybe I should just go back to my actuarial roots. I should go back and do some hedging. I should either, at the same company or find a new company. So it was affecting me enough to go like, this is just uncomfortable. This isn't a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then our whole HR, there's a whole global transformation of the company. It's a global company, and so there's always all these things going on. But they were standardizing and sort of optimizing their HR group. And so part of that became, there was this global workforce analytics group, and they said, we want you to go onto that global team. Cool, whatever, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Great opportunity. And so at that point, they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put you in this room, and you'll have a global leader and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is where it all kind of went south real fast, like day 1 or 2, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
Like I got in there, and these, just in case they're listening, these are great people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just saying that because I have to, like, it's not like a funeral that I have to say it. It's just, they really are. They're great people.
Mm-hmm.
But, one of the guys, he'd be on the phone quite a bit, and he'd have the earpiece thing going on, and he'd walk around with the tennis ball, kind of bounce it against the floor, wall, catch,
Mm-hmm.
floor, wall, catch, floor, wall, catch.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of this group, right? Like, and I'm in analytics. So that's kind of happening. He's on the phone talking, and he's bouncing the tennis ball. Now we have another gal, she's learning German, right? And so she's got the headset on, and once in a while she'd be saying German words, repeating them, because she's learning them in her earpiece or whatever. And I'm like, oh, what is happening? There's like a coffee pot, in the, what's the fancy coffee? I'm not a coffee drinker, but you make the.
I don't know. My wife is in chat. She probably knows. She
okay.
can
I know
probably,
there's some
she can probably tell me.
Some fancy coffee pot. Everybody's laughing at me because it's obviously they know the name of it, but like that was in our area. So people come in and do that. And when they do it, they'd make the espresso. They'd make the
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
really loud noise.
Hmm.
My boss liked opera, and he had a record player, and so sometimes he would play a record in there,
Hmm.
and we'd all be hearing this. And then he'd like, he'd be on the phone, he'd call me over there. So it's just like, it was like chaos in my mind. As somebody who
Yeah.
likes to sort of say, here's my plan of attack. And it was chaos. It was like a startup, right? And if it was a certain startup, it'd be kind of fun. Like everybody's like, oh, this energy, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Hey,
Yeah.
here we go. We got to get this sale. We got to make the sale. Well, I'm the nerd that's in there trying to figure out these spreadsheets.
Hmm.
That was absolute chaos for me, Matt. And
Yeah.
so within the first day or two, I was like, what did I do? And
Hmm.
I was still thinking, this is just uncomfortable. This is different. This isn't what I like. Right. But by day 3, I'm getting there at like 5:30 in the morning so that I can leave at like 2. And I'm outside of my car weeping,
Oh.
not wanting to go in.
Hmm.
And I was like, what is this?
Hmm.
Like, I consider myself pretty strong. Like, I can handle a lot of things. I've been through a fair amount of things, but I'm like, what is going on? And I
Hmm.
told my wife, I think my brain broke. Like, I don't know what happened. Like, this is not me. And then that's how it was. Like, every day was like that. Whereas, like, and I'm looking for excuses to get out of there or whatever. And so that
Hmm.
was kind of a very long answer to a short question, but that was that transition into that open environment, that open working space environment. That was the critical point where things just sort of went downhill.
Yeah. It sounds like it kind of sounds like what happened is that environment just made it impossible for you to get into the mindset that you needed in order to be able to actually focus on what you're doing almost, you know?
Yeah. And that's what was happening. And that was the rationale that I used, was
Hmm.
that this is just a chaotic environment and I can't do my work. But it got deeper than that,
Hmm.
right? It got so much deeper than that. And through therapy, through a lot of conversations, I really, what it came to be is that I was totally trapped.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
I felt trapped and out of control.
Hmm.
And because of some things in my past, that was a real scary place for me.
Yeah. Right.
And so it was about not being able to focus, but the bigger issue was that this anxiety that I had, like my blood pressure was up, my heart rate was up, I was sweating
Hmm.
profusely, and I was weeping uncontrollably in the car, and I would like end up taking half days off and all this stuff. It was really about, because I was no longer in control, I was trapped, and I was lost, and I didn't know what to do.
Right. And I think that anybody who's been through anxiety can probably relate in that regard, because I think that that feeling of or the feeling of having a specific relationship with the idea of control, like I think that's quite familiar to anybody who's been through anxiety, because it what it kind of relates to is your fight or flight mechanism is activated, right? Because you're in a situation where you want to be able to control what's going on around you. You want to be able to like keep yourself safe, but there's a perception that there's all these things in your environment that are threatening, and so your fight or flight is activated, but you can't do anything to deactivate it because you can't get rid of all this stuff around you that feels threatening
Mhm.
in some way, you know. And and for me that's a kind of a similar it's a similar thing in terms of my own experience being very much one where my anxiety kind of was triggered anytime I felt like I was in a situation where I didn't have control, but I was scrambling to kind of get it, you know. And so do you think that removing yourself from that environment, like did that was that kind of the exercise of control that you needed to kind of regain a bit more your balance in that regard when it came to the anxiety?
I think so. And I didn't know it was anxiety. Like, I just didn't know what was happening. Like, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know, am I having a heart attack? I just didn't know, because really didn't know people that had anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to some people like yourself, but never really deep enough to really understand what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, I would not have thought of it as a control thing. Like, I need to get out so that I can regain control. I just had to get out. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just had to get out. And I think you're right. The amygdala was just completely hijacked. And I think
Mm-hmm.
for most of my life, I've always just grabbed control. It's never been bad enough where I couldn't just grab control.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been able to fight. I've been able to
Yeah.
fight and keep control and laugh it off or whatever. And for whatever reason, this became, like you said, too much. There's too
Mm-hmm.
many things,
Yeah.
and I couldn't fight. and so what's left,
Yeah.
was to flight. And so
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think of it in terms of I need to regain control of my environment. I just thought I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at the time I'm 47 years old, and I'm going to tip over dead because I'm coming in here every day and I'm weeping and my blood pressure and my heart rate are going through the roof. And I liked the job. Like, that's the funny thing.
Yeah.
People say, would you hate your job? No, I liked the job and I liked all of the people.
Mm-hmm.
That it's so bizarre, but
Yeah.
yeah, but I had no choice,
Mm-hmm.
but to get out of there. And I think that was, that's a whole nother conversation. But I think people didn't get it. Um, People didn't get it. I don't know if they thought I was faking or what, or they're just like, he's too weak. I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
try not to worry about what people think anymore.
Sure.
But that was a big struggle too. Like, what if I quit? Then how's that going to be perceived, and how's that going to look on my
Mm-hmm.
resume, and what's that going to look like if I ever try to get another job?
Yeah.
And so I fought it as hard as I could for a couple of weeks. It wasn't that long, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I can't do this.
Yeah. My next question was going to be how long was it before you just quit? And I guess a couple of weeks is the answer.
A couple of weeks is the answer. I did go on short-term disability.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to my boss. I don't know what's going on, and they couldn't. I said, can I get an office somewhere else? Like, I tried to
Mm-hmm.
do this, and they weren't able to make those accommodations, which I think in hindsight they have to, but they didn't.
Yeah.
I think there's a place for that. So that's where part of that was like, did they not believe me? Like, this is a real thing.
Yeah.
Like, I've worked here for so long, spent 30 years in the corporate world, never had an issue. I'm not faking this.
Yeah.
But they didn't make reasonable accommodations, and I didn't push it. I'm not a big lawsuit guy or whatever. But because I said, if you just give me an office somewhere else, I'll come in for team meetings. I'll do all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do this.
Yeah.
They said they wouldn't. And so I approached the HR folks there, and I went on short-term disability for a little while, and then I didn't feel good about that. And so I started building my own business outside of work to try to get off of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as I made a little bit of money, I probably should have waited longer, but as soon as I made a little bit of money, I ended that and
Mm-hmm.
said, I officially resign so that they don't have to keep spending the money.
Mm-hmm.
And then just kind of went off my own, had a clean break of it. But yeah, it was within a couple of days where I knew what is going on. And in a couple of weeks, I was out of there.
Yeah. It's surprising to me, I guess, that the company was not willing to make accommodations. Because I certainly think that there's still a lot of mileage to like, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of making workplaces accessible to people who struggle with these kinds of things. But you would think that if you were able to go to them and say, look, it's a small concession on your part to allow me to work in a separate space, and in exchange, I'm going to be 10 times more effective in doing the job you hired me to do. And like, it blows my mind that they would rather get rid of you and hire somebody else than just like find a way to have you work in a separate room,
Right.
Because you'd think that hiring a new person altogether, going through that process, all of that you'd think would be more expensive for the company. And on top of that, if you were the best candidate for the job in the first place, they're settling for an inferior candidate just because they're not willing to make any kind of accommodation for you. Did they, do you think they considered all of that, or were they just like, we don't get it, so you're out?
Yeah, no, I think it was more of the latter. I think logically, I totally agree with you. Now, the whole thing imploded like 6 months later. The whole thing blew up. So there might have been something else going on there too. But no, I think there's a couple of factors at play here, and I totally agree. Like, this didn't make any sense. Like, I'd been there, I know the company. They loved me. I mean, my reviews were great. It wasn't like I was a subpar employee that they're trying to get rid of. Like,
Sure.
things were popping. I was very good at my job. I think a couple things that work there. One is it's a German-owned company, and I'm not trying to say there's a certain piece of it, but the Germans, at least the Germans that I dealt with at this company, because I would travel, were very stoic, very sort of tight upper lip kind of thing.
That's the Germans. That's for that. Like, yeah, as a European, I think we all have, like, the funny thing about Europe is, like, every country has its like identity within Europe as a whole, and there's a perception from each European country as to how you perceive the others. And with my perspective from Britain looking at the Germans is like, Yeah, the rest of Europe thinks the British are like the stiff upper lip people, but the Germans are like
Right.
the ones who don't have any emotions. You know, they're the ones who
Right.
are like, they're
Yeah.
the ones who are just like balanced about everything. They're just chill. They just don't really have ups and downs. Like, yeah,
Yeah, it
I
reminded
get
me
it.
like because I would travel for work and like one of my trips I went to Munich and then I went to Dublin, Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to Munich and like, very stoic, whatever. And like
Yeah,
I went to get in the front seat of the guy's cab. He's like, no, 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 in back. Use
yeah,
in back.
mm-hmm.
Whatever. Like, what are you doing up here? I'm like, oh, sorry, sorry, sorry. I got in back.
Right.
Then I go to Dublin. I get in the back of the guy's taxi. He's like, what are you doing back there? Get up here. And he's like just
Yeah,
telling me his whole life story. And I
yeah.
know this is a very small sample size, but it was like that was sort of a type and shadow. And so
Yeah, having lived in Dublin, that's Dublin for
okay.
you. You know,
Oh, it's
yeah.
fantastic. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. I
Mm-hmm.
knew the whole guy's life story. Um,
Yeah.
but so I think one of the pieces was that it was a German-owned company, and
Mm-hmm.
the leadership were Germans. So those are the people that I was reporting to, and I think I don't know what their perspective really was of that, but they weren't real open to this sort of soft, touchy feely. I've got emotions. I feel bad. So I think part of it was that,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the reason that I was given was that hey, this is like a startup, and we need everybody to be on the team in there all the time, sort of really immersed in the work so that you're
Mm-hmm.
hearing what I'm working on and I'm hearing what you're working on. And so they just said it just doesn't work in this because we need to all be on the same page. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was their rationale. Take it or leave it. I mean, I sort of just went under uh, I sort of submit to leadership in a way like that because I've been a leader myself and I know that there's always more to the story than most people see. And so I tend to be like one of these guys like, hey, here's my story, here's the situation. But if you decide because you see the bigger picture that it's not a good fit, then it's
Mm-hmm.
not a good fit. But yeah, I think especially one of the moves to HR. There's a little bit of a tangent, but when I moved from the business units, the actuarial investments, whatever, into HR, I thought, okay, when I get here, like this is going to be the best benefits. This is going to be the leaders that have the most compassion.
Yeah.
These are going to be the people that have the best trainers of management. And I was underwhelmed. And I think, kind of like with this, in this situation, you think, well, working in HR, you think they'd be the most accommodating of any business
Mm-hmm.
unit.
Yeah.
But it was not my situation.
Yeah, yeah. What was the reaction from your teammates, from your fellow employees that were working in that environment when you were, basically saying like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, well, I really was. I don't know, is the short answer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would come to work and I would be like, I share with my boss how horrible this was. But when I was there, I tried to not let
Mm-hmm.
on to it, and so then I would just leave. I'd go to lunch. I'd take my laptop, whatever. And so I don't think they really knew the magnitude of this thing. And then when I told my boss I'm going on short term, that was just it. Like they didn't let me back into the office. That was it. Like I didn't say
Wow.
goodbye. I didn't get to say goodbye to any of them. Nobody reached out.
Mm-hmm.
Like what's going on? I was told that, well, because they don't know why you're on short-term disability. So it could be a medical issue that there's the HIPAA laws and all that stuff.
I see.
They
Mm-hmm.
can't reveal that I'm on short-term
Right.
disability.
Mm-hmm.
They just say Steve's on leave. But nobody reached out privately or whatever. And I think maybe they were just honoring that. I don't know. So, and I wasn't there very long. Like 2 weeks isn't long enough to really build those
Mm-hmm.
relationships. But so I don't even know if they're listening to this. I don't even know if they know what my situation is. I don't know what story they were told.
Mm-hmm.
Because eventually I did just resign. So
Yeah.
it was weird. So I just tried to keep it between me and the boss.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that day came, that was just the end right there. There wasn't like, oh, come in 2 more days. I did a little bit more work on the side, but then it
Mm-hmm.
was just sort of over.
Wow. That's a very sort of odd way to start and then end a job. I guess it
Ugh.
must have been a very strange time.
Well, and yeah, and I'd been at the company 7 or 8 years or so doing different
Mm-hmm.
things, and so it's just sort of like, oh, Steve's gone one day.
Yeah.
I was only in HR a couple of years, but I
Mm-hmm.
did those other things. I think it's just one of those, oh, Steve's gone, whatever happened to him, and nobody can tell him or whatever. So,
Mm-hmm.
sort of weird. Yeah, sort of a weird ending to a 30-year corporate career.
Yeah, I can imagine. We have a question come in from Final Table Boy in the chat. Did he continue to suffer anxiety after leaving that company?
Thank you for that question. Not to that extent.
Mm-hmm.
When I removed that, it did remove the anxiety. Now there's lingering effects. Like every day, I think for a while I was still like,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on? And I'd realize, oh, I don't have to go to the job.
Mm-hmm.
What was really interesting to me though was still to this day, If I go past that building, I get
Oh yeah.
anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And the last, it'd been about 6 months or so between the last time and then just recently I went past and I thought, okay, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure it's fine.
Yeah.
And I went past there and I was like, and I don't
Yeah.
know, that was weird. So I did, because it's in a location where in the West Twin Cities, that you drive by it on major
Mm-hmm.
freeways, I do see it a fair amount. And so I haven't had that anxiety. And that's why it's sort of like, it's hard for me to relate to people that have an ongoing anxiety and ongoing
Mm-hmm.
depression, because I'm not going to pretend I know what that's like, because I've just really had this acute thing, which
Mm-hmm.
gave me great insights into who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, it's given me an appreciation for people that are dealing with this at any level on an ongoing basis. But I'm very, very grateful that that's not an ongoing situation. But I will say this: I can feel it creeping up now. I
Mm-hmm.
think I don't know what happened if that broke the dam.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm in situations now, I've learned ways to get to avoid this now.
Mm-hmm.
So like for example, and we haven't even talked about like the root cause of all this, which we don't need to, but there's some root cause issues with me in my past,
Mm-hmm.
where being trapped in a room or in a situation is very, very alarming to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now, like, if I'm at a family, say I'm at a family reunion, which now hasn't happened because of COVID, but my
Mm-hmm.
wife's family, we go there. And if I'm there and I really enjoy it, I love all the people, but I can sense it's starting to creep in, like, I need to get out of
Mm-hmm.
here.
Yeah.
And I've just learned now that I just need to get out of there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
instead of trying to fight it and fight it and fight it, and then at some point just kind of blowing and just running out,
Yeah.
which would happen. Now
Mm-hmm.
I've learning how to cope with that. So it is anxiety. I guess it still is anxiety, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in situations that I feel like I can't control anymore.
Yeah, that's I mean, it sounds like a positive development in that sense, because it sounds like just an experience of learning about yourself and learning what situations are comfortable for you and what situations aren't, and then just choosing not to like unnecessarily put yourself in the uncomfortable ones, right? And I think we all go through that to some degree.
Yeah, and I think I had to swallow my pride a little bit there, Matt. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think um, whether it was raised or I just caught it from my environment or whatever it is, you know, if I'm not feeling comfortable, well, just suck it up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if just whatever, just
Yeah.
deal with it. Like, that
Yeah.
was the impression that I was under, that's what, a successful human being does.
Mm-hmm.
And I think through therapy and through conversations, I've come to the point where I realize that's okay to not have to
Mm-hmm.
suck it up. Like, it's okay to
Yeah.
actually escape. It's okay to do
Mm-hmm.
what's best for my health, my mental health, my physical health, and do those things, and just not worry what people think, or I mean, really, I'm my worst critic, right? Or to be super hard on myself
Mm-hmm.
for that. Like, if I escape, to not feel like, oh my gosh, I'm such a, I'm so dumb, whatever. Just no, man. You did what you had to do in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying not to be so hard on myself.
Yeah, and that's a really valuable perspective. My wife's there in chat saying, "Just suck it up," is what she was raised to believe. So yeah, I think that that mentality of just suck it up is it's so prevalent. But I also imagine, and I'm not speaking necessarily from experience here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine there must, at least in the corporate world, be maybe even a little bit more of that, right? That mentality of just like deal with it, just like suck it up, get on with it, you know?
Oh, I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
especially as you get to, as you go up the leadership ranks, which I was able to
Mm-hmm.
do. Boy, don't show weakness. Don't
Mm-hmm.
show weakness. That's the thing. I mean, I haven't had, I won't call them out specifically, but I mean, basically had somebody say, if you don't know the answer to a question,
Mm-hmm.
you make it up. You don't say you don't know.
What?
No, I'm not kidding. This is an
Wow.
executive leader of a Fortune 500 company, because I was leading a thing and I said, that is a phenomenal question. We're not sure which way that's going to go. We're going to do more work on that thing
Mm-hmm.
and figure that out. Afterward, he pulled me aside and said, you can't say that. You need to give an answer. You cannot show any weakness at all. If you don't know the answer, you make it up and then you apologize later. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of sort of, yeah, I know you're shaking your head. I'm shaking my head like,
Yeah.
who does this? But that was part of, at least that part of that leadership culture, was do not show weakness. So
Yeah.
what would that person's reaction have been,
Mm-hmm.
if I had said, man, I'm just struggling with all the noise and stuff, and I'm just feeling bad, and I think
Yeah.
I need to get my own office. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. That person would not have reacted very well to that, I assume.
Right.
What's interesting to me there is like you mentioned that the person who was putting out there that idea that you should just make stuff up if you don't know.
Yeah.
Like you said, he was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. So I
No,
assume
not the
that.
CEO. He was an executive.
He was an
He
executive.
was
Okay.
he was a C level
Okay.
executive, but not the CEO.
So this was a successful guy, right? So like,
Yes,
or at
very
least
successful.
yeah. So what seems to me to be like paradoxical is that you've got a lot of these companies that probably have quite toxic mentality filtering down through them when it comes to that sort
Yeah.
of thing, but that are also very successful in spite of that. Now, what I'm curious about is whether you think that there is going to be a bit of a reckoning for some of these companies at some point, in the sense that the dam will break and this mentality of suck it up will start to come back to haunt them a little bit. Do you think that might be the case?
I think so. I mean, I hope so, kind of. But I haven't seen it in my lifetime, at least the companies that I'm familiar with. So
Mm-hmm.
this person had another person reporting to them, very toxic person,
Mm-hmm.
like would make people cry, would make almost made me cry one day. Like,
Jeez.
I mean, I came in, and so our unit got moved. If you really know my story, you know who this is.
Mm-hmm.
But our unit got moved underneath this person
Mm-hmm.
as sort of because of a reorganization, which happens. I was not pleased about that at all, but we're going to make this thing work. I went in there, and I'm the guy. I get the 5-star reviews every year, the good bonuses, like
Mm-hmm.
everything. And I went in there, and this person was telling me, "You are nothing but a pencil pusher. You're not adding any value to the company. I don't know why they even keep you on staff." Like telling me this, like this is my first conversation with this person, and I
Wow.
think it was a test of some kind. I don't know, but this is the same person that would have a whiteboard and they put the names of people that were good and the people that made mistakes on a
Mm-hmm.
whiteboard in their office, like really, really bad, toxic, right?
Yeah.
This person kept getting promoted. And so, the day of reckoning thing, I think has to happen, because I can't imagine, with the new, with, I feel people getting more and more enlightened about things like mental health,
Mm-hmm.
about diversity, about inclusion, those things. I think as that generation raises
Mm-hmm.
up, I can't imagine they put up with that kind of stuff. But you know what? They pay well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of credibility that goes with saying I work for a Fortune 500 company. And I think there's a lot of people that are saying, I'm willing to go there. It's like the basketball referee.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go there and willing to just be yelled at for 2 hours
Yeah. Yeah.
to get the pay and prestige. And I feel like that's what happens there. And I think there's enough people that are willing to, um, that aren't as phased by
Mm-hmm.
that toxicity, that are willing to trade it for a paycheck.
Yeah.
So I think I'd like to think the day of reckoning is coming. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I think that about a lot of things about the world, like there's days of
Yeah.
reckoning coming and things don't seem to be happening. And
Yeah. That's
so,
true.
and so I don't know. I'd like to share the optimism for that. I think for me and what I promote and when I talk to my children, and, when I get a chance to talk to leaders and companies and businesses about leadership, I certainly talk about those sorts of things,
Mm-hmm.
that, leadership is much more now than just pounding. Um, but there's enough people that are willing to be yelled at, like basically go to the coal mine and have
Mm-hmm.
a disastrous 8 hours in order to feed their family.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a strange situation that we're in. There's a couple points coming in from my wife in chat, which I'll mention in a second. But before we kind of jump off that topic of the sort of workplace culture there, I think one thing that I sort of noticed that I think we may start to observe over the next like 10 to 20 years or so is, I think nowadays, given how easy it is, or not easy, but like given how many more opportunities there are for people to launch a career for themselves that doesn't require like getting out of college, subjecting yourself to like a graduate level entry level position. I think what you may find over the next 10 to 20 years is all the really talented young people are just going to reject this type of environment. They're just going to be like, I don't want to do this because I can just work for myself. And these companies might end up finding they just can't recruit anyone that's up to their standards. Do you think that might happen?
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways that it could cause a transformation there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's exactly right. Like, especially like I think there's waves, right? Like, so I was parented in a certain way and I parented my kids in a certain way and it was different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, the like my kids didn't grow up, with sort of the strong rod, kind of
Yeah.
beating them down or whatever. And so
Right.
I think for them to go into a corporate environment would be harder if that environment was toxic like that. They'd be
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm out of here. This is too extreme. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. I think there's enough flexibility for people to create their own jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And those really, the people that are really needed, those experts in Fortune 500 companies like financial services, where I was, yeah, I think they're going to have plenty of options.
Mm-hmm.
So that they maybe don't have to put up with it. But I'm
Yeah.
telling you, there's something about the stability of paycheck and the stability of
Mm-hmm.
benefits and all that stuff inside those Fortune 500 companies that's very attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, now as somebody who runs my own business, now I work with small business owners, solopreneurs, Main Street shops. I mean, running a small business is hard. Even if you're just
Yeah.
a one person doing running a thing, there's a lot of stuff you have to do. And so I think that is the one barrier to entry that could
Mm-hmm.
push people back into the corporate world of just give me a paycheck. But I hope you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you're right that there's enough people rejecting it that they sort of have to change their ways.
Yeah. Or at least maybe that the companies which start to actually value the well-being of their employees will start to succeed at a level where everybody kind of recognizes that that's the better way to do things, hopefully
Right.
that's
And
what happens.
I agree. And I guess I will say, I mean, I've had some really good corporate experiences too, with some
Mm-hmm.
really good
Sure.
caring bosses who I think my situation would have been very different underneath that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think even the company that I worked for, and I'm sure some people have gone out to LinkedIn to see where I'm talking about, they're always rated as one of the best companies in the world to work for. And I had great experiences with them for many, many years. And I'm not even saying my boss was really bad. It was just a bad situation. But I think at the end of the day, it's like HR 101, right? You join an organization, but you quit a manager.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so I think, there are corporations that value employees. And even within the construct of that, there's really, really bad managers
Mm-hmm.
who don't.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the tricky part is I always wonder, how do these people still have the job that they have? Because,
Yeah.
if the vision and the ethos of the company is the well-being of the employee, and here's a high-level manager that doesn't have that same perspective,
Mm-hmm.
how do they still have a job there?
Yeah.
And I asked that question of this person. They said, because they produce.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a willingness to contradict vision and culture for the sake of results.
Yeah. That's
And that's
interesting.
probably always going to be a tension.
Yeah, I guess maybe it will be. So let's tackle the couple points that Cricket Pinkball, my wife here, made in chat. She says it sounds like the culture itself of not showing weakness is really like a prison of it in itself. That culture is very inclined to make you feel trapped, and that the culture was working actively to force you to act in ways that were bizarre or contrary to your personality. Does that feel accurate?
100% accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wrote an article a couple of years ago called about the good life trap,
Mm-hmm.
which is exactly that. Like it's a good life, right? You're in, like, if you look on paper, like, okay, here he is. He's a director of a Fortune 500 company, getting paid way too much more money than I was worth. Great family, great whatever, blah 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
It was the good life,
Yeah.
but that's what became a trap
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't just the financial part of it. It was just that emotionally I was feeling like, well, who am I to complain about this?
Mm.
Like, who am
Yeah.
I to complain? Like, I'm even those first few days of that really horribleness of going there and going, that was the self-talk, right? I'd be
Mm-hmm.
weeping uncontrollably. I'm like, who are you to be complaining about this? You're working this great company, making a lot of money, and so it became a trap. And so I think maybe I'm not answering the question exactly, but then the culture of that, the kind of that the chaos, that became a trap as well. And I really felt like I couldn't speak out on it,
Mm-hmm.
partially because like I felt like I was the weak one in the formula, but also there was that lingering, who am I to complain?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
How many people would give their left arm to be able to be in my situation? And I'm sitting here whining about the fact that somebody's learning German on the phone. Like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, you don't have the right to complain because this kind of lifestyle is what people try to work towards. And so like complaining is not to be done. You just got to sit there and shut up and
That's it, man. Like I didn't have the right to complain. That's so well said. And
Mm-hmm.
and let's throw on the fact of this that I do work in Rwanda. So
Mm-hmm.
Since starting 2009, I've been doing work in Rwanda. I've been there 4 times. I see the poorest of the poor, right? And this is all related because I've talked to these people who their families are dying of AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing they can do. They're walking 6 hours a day to get water. It all sounds cliche, but it's real. Like I've seen it, I've been there, I've done it. So you layer that piece on to I'm weeping in my car because I'm so weak that I can't go in and do a spreadsheet in the midst of chaos. That's bad enough. And then I layer
Mm-hmm.
on the fact that there's all of these people that I know in northern Rwanda who don't even have money to feed their family this week.
Yeah.
And I'm complaining about this, and
Yeah.
even now I still go like, yeah, who am I to be complaining about this? I still have that self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
But that does layer on, and that sort of, I think, made it harder and harder to just open up and say, I'm broken here.
Yeah.
Because I had no right to complain just as an American.
Mm-hmm.
Now the fact that I layer on all of my knowledge and firsthand experience in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
it was even harder, I think, to make that announcement, I guess.
Yeah, because you start to feel a sense of guilt as to why am I
Oh,
not more grateful for everything that I have instead of being
100%.
focused on the negative, and
Yeah,
I think
I wasn't just a whiny American. Now I'm a whiny American who knows what life is like in Africa, who's
mm-hmm.
been there 4 times, and I'm still complaining.
Right. It
Yeah,
makes you feel doubly bad. Yeah, it's
it
awful.
does. It's a
Um,
bigger hill to climb.
yeah, exactly. The second point that my wife here made was that person was the person with regard to the person who was telling you that you added no value to the company and things
Yeah,
like that. She says that person was putting you in your place because they wanted you to submit to their authority. And because you were so well reviewed and liked in the company, they felt threatened. That seems like a pretty good analysis of what was going on
I
there.
think she's spot on. That
Yeah.
is what people told me after the fact that I
Mm-hmm.
trusted with that information. They said, well, your group got brought into their group, and you were clearly somebody that could add a ton of value and be seen as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And they said she's just threatened. Whatever. It didn't make me feel much better, but I think that is an appropriate assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I think because this person really, it's about their how much land they control in the
Ah.
geography of this overall company.
Mm-hmm.
Very much, I'm sure that's part of why we got pushed underneath her, was because she's trying to acquire, right? It's
Yeah.
like playing Risk. It's like a land grab. And so I think if I got brought in there and then potentially could create my own, Madagascar or something, that's
Just a little
that's a
island
threat.
off the coast. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
They wouldn't let you have your Madagascar, so they just
Yes.
kicked you out of Africa altogether.
Yeah, there's the
Yeah.
name of my book, right? Yeah,
There we go.
Losing Madagascar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about that because I feel like that kind of uh, that competitiveness in the corporate landscape is something that we always like from outside the corporate world. It's easy to sort of hear about that and think that like that kind of thing is something that just exists in movies and maybe it's not really like that, but it kind of sounds like it actually is kind of like that.
It is like that. It is. Sometimes it's not, but it very, very often is, especially you get to the bigger companies.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for a lot of big companies. I worked for Medtronic, 3M, Allianz,
Mm-hmm.
Thrivent. These are big companies, at least in our area, but even global companies. And there's a lot of competitiveness there, for sure. Just as a tangent, the TV show The Office,
Yeah.
that
Mm-hmm.
stuff happens too.
Oh yeah.
Like I had a boss
Mm-hmm.
who was Michael Scott. Like you think that's a joke, and that's what makes
Mm-hmm.
the show so funny to me. Like
Yeah.
I had things that I could tell you about that are like that couldn't have been real.
Yeah.
It was totally real. So yeah, it's a spoof. Obviously, all
Mm-hmm.
of those things like the competitiveness and those things are spoofs, but they are based on reality.
Yeah, yeah, and certainly for me, like I don't have any real experience within the corporate world, but like I can relate the UK version of The Office came first, which
Right.
and I can look at characters from that, and I could be looking at even just jobs I had like when I worked in a hotel in college, and I could
Yeah.
look at bosses I had and been like, yeah, that's kind of like this guy kind of reminds me of that, and so I think that there's a grain of truth in every cliche or every stereotype and things like that, and I think there's a good degree of cultural stereotyping that goes on about corporate life, but it comes from a place of experience, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a way to go before the corporate world is like understood, I guess, but by people from outside it, because I think it's kind of somewhat opaque until you've been in there, you know. I think
Mm-hmm.
until you've actually experienced it. Is there anything in particular that, let's say, if we have anybody listening who maybe doesn't have experience of that environment, but is kind of potentially thinking about in future, maybe they might have opportunities to be in that world. Like we have some younger viewers who maybe are still thinking about what they want to do after high school. Do you have any advice for someone who's thinking about stepping into that world as to how you might navigate it?
Yeah, I think really just I wish I knew myself better when I was
Mm-hmm.
younger, and I think that would have helped a lot with my decisions now because I had a great corporate career, and I think there's a lot to be gained from working inside of a corporation. Like you meet people that are so smart that really you can really learn from, you can grow
Mm-hmm.
from. The diversity perspectives. I come from rural Minnesota, 99.8% white Caucasian
Mm-hmm.
men are in charge. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you go to a corporate world, and I had an opportunity to build friendships with people from that are very diverse in all sorts of different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and that was beautiful too. And so, there's so many good things that happen from a company, but I think the key is really becoming self-aware of who you are, what do you enjoy, and putting yourself in those situations to really thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Because the corporate world is very vast, right? There's a lot of different ways you can work in a call center in a corporate world, and all it is you and the phone and you're in one boss.
Yeah.
You don't get into the political parts of it,
Mm-hmm.
or you can get into management. And pretty soon now you're involved in all of those things. So I think just really know who you are. I think is the key to that thing. And from a real practical perspective, I say take opportunities that come your way.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not misaligned with who you are, take those opportunities because you just don't know where it's going to go. You don't know who you're going to meet. And the world is really a world of connections.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more that you can get in there, show your value, build connections, you can do really well. But at the end of the day, it's Matt, we play poker, and then sort of there's this idea of, why do you play poker? Like, what are you actually trying to do? Are you trying to just have fun? Are you trying to make money?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't know what you're really doing, it's hard to make decisions on that. And I would say the same
Yeah.
thing in the corporate world and in your life in general. I'm just such a believer in saying, what do you ultimately want out of life?
Mm-hmm.
And most
Yep.
people can't answer that question. Like, ultimately, what do you want out of life? And I think if you're a young person, if you can start to solidify that, and it could change over time, but start to solidify that in your mind, and then say what sort of employment best lines up with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, for me, my wife and I grew up really poor.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we were both poor, and so financial security was huge for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what the corporate world provided for me. So even those days that were really tough, not the very end, but days that were really tough for the first 30 years were like, yeah, but this is so important to have that financial security that it's more important than, man, I wish I was just having fun.
Right.
That kind of thing. So I think really long rambling answer. I apologize for that,
No,
but
it's all good.
I would say self-awareness. It wasn't until I was in my 40s that I started becoming even self-aware of who I really was.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get that at a younger age and then know what you're trying to do, and then recognize that your job, whether that's a corporate job or anything else, it's a means to an end. Like for most of us, try not to find your identity in your job, in who you work for. Your identity is who you are.
Mm-hmm.
What you do is try to do something that you can enjoy that makes you money. So just try not to flip those things around too much.
Yeah, that's a lot of great advice for sure. I'm curious also how your experiences have influenced you in what you're doing now as a small business coach and in the people that you're working with now. Is there any specific perspective that you think you've gained through your experiences with anxiety and your departure from the corporate world that's kind of informed what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we just talked about, like no matter who I like do business coaching for, it almost always turns into life coaching.
Right.
So, because I'm such a believer, because I don't really work with the big businesses. It's the
Mm-hmm.
small businesses. It's the people that have given their 20, 30, 40, 50 years to the roofing company, and
Mm-hmm.
they want to see it succeed or whatever. But it's kind of like what I just said. So much of my experience now comes out in, well, what are you ultimately trying to do with your life?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is the point of your small business? Before we figure out, your pricing strategies and your marketing strategies and your key performance metrics and all those things, what do you want from this thing?
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how many people can't answer that question. I mean, even so, we'll spend a couple hours just digging into what are you ultimately trying to do with your life and with your small business. And so that is a direct offshoot, I think, of the journey that I've had over the last few years of moving from, okay, well, I just know that I get up, I go to the get up in the morning, I go to my job, I come home, try to relax, and then repeat it the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Because I moved from that to trying to live a life of intentionality and a life of purpose. So now that clearly comes out in my business coaching as well. So I've got the skill set, I've got the ability to help you with your business. But to me, if we don't know where we're going, any road will get us there, right? It's the whole Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland thing. Like,
Yeah. So
where
true.
I can help you with your business, I can help you make more money. Is that what you want, or do you want more time?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Can I do both?
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, you can. Like, if that's your goal, like, okay, so tell me how much money do you want to make this year, and how many hours a week do you want to work?
Mm-hmm.
Never thought about it that way. That's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, let's do that. But until we do that, we can't really set a course of action. And so, yeah, I think 10 years ago, you asked how it sort of impacted me. I think in a few ways. One is that intentionality of what are you ultimately trying to do at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a new appreciation, a new grace, um, a new perspective on we're all in this thing, but we all have our own story. We all have our own journey. I never thought mine would involve, that acute anxiety that I had.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to pretend to say that I know what it's like to live with it on a day in and day out basis. I can't, but I can have an appreciation for it now. I think empathy has been built over that. And so I think all of that stuff plays into what I do now, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly.
Wow. Yeah. I should hire you to help me build this stream up some more. I should. I don't know how much experience you have with Twitch, but we can talk about that.
Well, I'm a business guy, so I don't have to know the technical side of it to help you get some viewers or whatever.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, let's do it. Yeah. So
Right.
that's a great perspective to kind of well, not quite wrap with. We've got one more thing I want to just briefly mention, but I think there's a lot that people can take forward from that, because I think that the experience that you've had, it sounds like it's kind of brought that perspective into kind of a very like a microcosm sort of way, where like you have a very clear idea of the type of perspective that you're imparting onto people, and I'm sure that makes you more impactful in what you're doing.
I think so. I think so. At the end of the day, I think now I really consider myself, I'm a community builder.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I do. And so it's building communities, but it's the paradigm of building community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really around, I mean, I always talk about, it's about having a clear vision. So anytime you're building a community, whether it's a friendship circle, a Twitch stream,
Mm-hmm.
a business, a nonprofit, a school, it's what's that vision? Like, what are you ultimately trying to do? And it has to be clear. It has to be compelling. You have to know, ultimately what you're trying to do, and then surround yourself with people that share that vision, that can be committed to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think the mistake that a lot of us make is we just try to surround ourselves with people that get the vision, and we don't surround ourselves with people that will also be, committed to each other in these healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you start doing those things, and then you allow people to be completely authentic with who they are, with each other, with the vision, that's where just the power happens. And so that's why when I talk about community building, I think that's where it all comes together for me. And it's a mindset more than it is like a practical sort of thing, even though there's steps you can take. And so, yeah, that's where it's all kind of come back to me in that sort of a realm, and self-awareness, and I guess self-grace,
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion. Those all play a huge role in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one last thing that I want to mention before we wrap, because we're just about hitting the hour mark, so I think we can wrap soon. Is we have normally I end with asking someone to pass on like a bit of positive advice for people or something, but you've kind of already done that. So what I want to
Oh,
do
good.
today is we tend to have themes on the stream. We have on whatever day of the week it is, we have a different theme. So Tuesday is Gratitude Tuesday, which is all about talking about things that we're grateful for. So right now, what do you have in your life that you're really grateful for?
Yeah, I'd say my wife and a few key friends,
Mm-hmm.
who are encouraging me to be who I am.
Mm-hmm.
um, Incredibly grateful. So I did a TED talk about the peeps in your Jeep, and it's all about having the right people in your life. And I don't have a huge circle of like my inner circle. But I think of a few people that come to mind that I'm just so grateful for, because I can feel free to pour my heart out, and I'm not afraid to say I'm weak in this area, and I don't expect them to make fun of me. I don't expect
Hmm.
them to, to trample on me. I expect them to encourage me, and they do. So I'd say that is one of the key things for me.
Cool. Absolutely. That's it's really good to hear. We have a point from Smithy in the chat who says, "My wife and I have been considering starting a small business, so this has been really informative. Thank you, Steve." Um,
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, if you
yeah.
ever want to chat, let me know. It's quite the journey, but it's very exciting. And I would just say, know what you're ultimately trying to start. When you say you want to start a small business,
Hmm.
really think through what is your ultimate goal, not your widgets, not your pricing, just
Hmm.
what is your vision of success with that small business? Is it making a bunch of money? Is it a bunch of free time? Is it just doing something you love?
Hmm.
Is it autonomy? Like, what really is that core driver of you guys wanting to start that small business?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great thing for Smithy to be thinking about. So he's a regular member of our community. So
Cool.
if he has more questions on that front, I will direct him straight to you, and maybe you'll get
Yeah,
yourself a customer out of it.
sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to chat.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's about enough. I think we can wrap there. But thank you very much, Steve, for being with us. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, my pleasure, Matt.
Cool. Well, we'd be happy to have you back on at some point in the future. Hopefully, this channel will be 10 times as big by the time you come back.
I
Um,
love it.
we'll see. But yeah, thank you very much again. I'll let you hop off the Zoom call now, and I'll keep chatting to the guys in chat.
All right, take care, and
All
thanks
right.
everybody.
No problem.
Bye.
Take care, Steve. Bye. All right, guys. That was Steve Fredlund, small business coach and anxiety sufferer. A really interesting story about how anxiety impacted his career. I think a perspective that was very interesting to hear. He obviously has a lot of great advice to impart. Obviously, a very knowledgeable guy in a lot of different areas. So I'm delighted that he was able to join us and pass on some insights, pass on some expertise. So thank you guys for tuning in for that. I'm going to quickly hop off stream again for a moment in just a second and get back to the normal stream view, because you can see I am still on the Zoom view right here. Well, let's see if I can switch this back. Oh, okay, that looks really weird because I haven't got the resolution right yet. So let's go back to what we had before. All right. Yeah, guys, I'm going to cut the stream off in just a second, and then I'm going to go straight back to being live. We're just going to be on Twitch instead of Twitch and YouTube, and we're going to carry on with some of our read-along of Lost Connections by Johan Hari. So keep with me, stick with me, guys, and I'll be back in a second. Just refresh the stream.